reminds me of an article I was just reading about a lot of cities in the US dealing with nonprofits that have come to help with a certain situation, right? Like homelessness or affordable housing, crime intervention, but then essentially they become like the city governments will pay them to do this, but then the nonprofits essentially become incentivized to not stop the problem
Oh yeah, we
because
covered that on America Uncovered.
yeah, like the idea is that they become like it becomes a kind of this like industrial complex, right? Like the southern border industrial complex where the HHS or Homeland Security pays all these nonprofits to house migrants or do these things because the government can't handle it themselves. So yeah, I wonder about that. That's what you're talking about. Like the UN comes in and now sets up an infrastructure with all these NGOs, and now there's a industry around migrants crossing like extremely dangerous areas to try to get to the US.
Yeah, and it's even more than that too, because I mean, it's not only that, but part of the process is they pay, built into the migrant trail are areas where you have to go through human traffickers. So, for example, Nicaragua is not part of the Global Compact for Migration, and so when people they go through Panama, they go through Costa Rica, they hit Nicaragua, you have to use human traffickers once you reach Nicaragua. And so they're built into the system. The same thing when you reach the northern part of Mexico and you're about to cross into the United States, you have to go through the cartels. And the cartels, they're making $5,000, $7,000 per person, or they kill you. And that's built into the process they've established.
Because those are the realities of what they have to work around to accomplish this migration.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and that raises the question too, because I talked to the head of Senafront, the former head of Senafront in Panama, and Senafront is like their border patrol / their military. They technically don't have a military. They're kind of like Costa Rica. Senafront is basically a military. They wear army fatigues, they carry military weapons, but they don't call themselves a military. But they do the security. They're they're integrated into the migrant camps because they're kind of the security for it, right? And so, for example, if they get news that gang members are raping and killing and stuff like that, they'll go into the Darien Gap and try to stop it. Sometimes they'll end up killing the gang members. But they also deal with the United Nations and the NGOs, like suing them all the time. If they inhibit movement of people, they get sued. And it's not just in Panama; it's all across Latin America. Even in Mexico, for example, I talked to one journalist, an Oscar Rodriguez. He's a Mexican journalist who I was with in the documentary, and he said that he was embedded with some of the different migrant caravans. He said that there were Venezuelan cartel members, Tren de Aragua, integrated into these groups, and they actually started rioting. They were threatening to kill Mexican authorities, and when the Mexican authorities tried stopping them because there were violent gang members, telling them they're going to start cutting throats and stuff like that, they had to let them go because the United Nations intervened and forced them to allow them to go. And, so the problem I ran into in Panama was the government there and Senafront, they were saying that the NGOs are even at a point now where they're undermining national sovereignty, that the countries don't feel they can even enforce their normal laws, or they face like international lawsuits and so on.
Wow, that's amazing how this sort of global international thing can just end up having such a profound influence on the running of just your own nation.
Well, I mean, especially if you're a small nation like Panama,
yeah.
Right?
Well, and that goes into something else too, which is, in America, we don't see the United Nations as having that much influence. Like, if they talk about Interpol or whatever else, we don't feel they have any jurisdiction over us. Like the way Americans view the United Nations is it's more like a diplomatic thing. For the most part, that's how we see it, right? But if you go into Latin America, even if you go into Europe, the United Nations is actually really powerful. They have a lot of influence. Like they're more powerful than the local governments. in a lot of ways. And so when you go into these countries, it's not like here. It's like the United Nations is running operations, and they're like a more powerful government than the country they're in.
Which is what many commentators in the United States are afraid of, that it then becomes, it doesn't matter what the people of a nation, their elected officials, whatever policies they want to enact, it's being controlled by this outside world government, I guess, that they don't have control or say in.
Yeah, and that's where it gets real concerning, because, one of the things I dig into in the documentary is I want to find out why the heck they're doing this. Because in America, we're not really being, not only are we not being told why they're doing it, we're not even being told that there was an agreement that facilitates it. This isn't part of our discussion. And I think because of that, we're having a false debate in this country. People are debating over whether it's racist to, not like the migrants. And that's pretty much where the normal right-left debate is. We're not debating over whether we should be part of this international agreement to facilitate the whole thing, using our tax dollars. And keep in mind, U.S. tax dollars are used for this. There's even a UN agreement. It's called the Grand Bargain Pact. And they have a program called cash-based intervention, where American tax dollars are being handed out to people illegally immigrating here in the form of cash in envelopes or like prepaid debit cards, like EBT cards, basically, like welfare cards, basically. And that's our tax dollars doing that.
Well, that's fantastic. We put that money into their pockets. They come to the United States and they pump that back into the economy.
There you go. Modern economics, Chris.
I thought that it was only in New York City that they were getting the debit cards.
So there's different programs. New York City's doing it on a city level. Chicago's doing stuff similar. But there's also, that's in the U.S., but in Latin America, they have programs run through the United Nations that do the same thing. And because, again, the purpose is to facilitate it into the U.S. or into Canada, that's our tax dollars doing that as well.